Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Backline with Rob and Adam. My name is Adam Cawley, alumnus of the Second City Main Stage.
And my name is Rob Norman. I wrote a book called Improvising Now, A Practical Guide to Modern Improv, and now I'm on a podcast.
Whoa, a book a few years ago, a podcast today. Slow down. You're really grinding it out.
I'm grinding it out. People say, he's working too hard. And I go, listen, I wrote a book in 2014. Write one improv book every 7 years.
Well, Rob, it's nice to see you, and I think anybody who's watching the online video version will be thrilled to see you, because the last time I saw you, you were wearing an eye patch.
Yeah, it was rough. I can't believe I recorded a podcast while I had a scratch cornea. What a bad idea that was.
Yeah, I think I said something that made you laugh, and you were like, uh-oh, my eye's leaking.
It got even worse. So what would happen when you have a scratch cornea? You basically have a cut on your eyeball. That's what they should call it. Why do we have all these elitist doctors telling us it's a scratch cornea? You got a cut in your eyeball. Call it a day. So you got a cut in your eyeball. You know what your eyeball doesn't like? It doesn't like water and it doesn't like salt. So it feels this cut. It goes, uh-oh, you have something stuck in your eye. It starts to water. That hurts so much that your eyes start blinking nonstop, which opens the cut more, which makes it think there's something more in your eye, so it waters more. After our podcast, I did that cycle for about 3 hours of just sheer agony before going to an optometrist. Then I get there. She goes, yeah, you got a pretty bad scratch here. Here's this ointment, which is basically like a, you know, when you have hot glue guns, you have those cartridges that are just kind of like gel, yeah. You basically take that and you just jam it into your eye and rub your eye with it, and it hurts 3 times as bad. I call back the optometrist. I go, this kills, and she goes, yeah, it hurts really bad. I was like, you didn't want to tell me that before I jammed a crayon into my eye?
It's very funny because you assume medicine is going to soothe things, right? You've got a sore throat, you get a tea, you get a Neocitrin, a Halls, whatever. I remember, this is not the same thing at all, but I remember being sick when I was a kid and going into like kind of our medicine cabinet, and they had Buckley's, you know, the cough syrup, and I took a big swig of it, and I was like, oh my God! Someone has replaced the cough syrup with like melted Vicks VapoRub. This is horrible. I should throw this up immediately. And then I learned that's what Buckley's tastes like. And their motto is it's something like it tastes so bad because it works. But if the medicine is awful, you should probably let people know. That's my point.
Well, I guess Buckley's lets you know with their ad campaign, which is a very smart ad campaign.
It's not even awful, though. It was so, like, my body rejected it. My taste buds were like, this can't be cough syrup. This is some sort of cleaner. You should get rid of it.
Yeah, that's how I feel about Brio. The Italian
for
soda.
Those of you, yeah, if you don't know, Brio is like the Italian Coke. And, man, the people who love Brio, they are liars. Brio is not good, but it's very different.
It's very earthy. You know how, like, you get a root beer, but it doesn't really taste like that? Well, Brio should be called root beer because it tastes like a bunch of carbonated roots. That's how I would describe it.
Just call it root.
Root drink. Brio is a root drink.
Well, Rob, I know that I'd say 75% of people tune into this podcast to hear our banter, and 25 about our thoughts on improv. So I think we should get to our improv just to like satisfy everybody. There's something interesting that I've been hearing about. You and I are, we often do coaching, teaching, but with Zoom, with the pandemic, now you can teach people, you can coach people wherever they are. And the same is going for all these theaters. So no matter where, like you and I would be like, we're going to go do an intensive in New York and study with the UCB. and we could do a weekend intensive because we don't live in New York. And now people can go through every theater in the world, no matter where you are from. But each of these theaters, each of these coaches, no matter who you're studying with, they all have a very distinct style of improv. And that's what separates them from other theaters. That's why they're saying, you got to come to us. We're the only ones who do blank. We specialize in blank. But then we get to a point where, oh, okay, I've studied all of them, and I'm about to do a show. That's what I want to talk about. That mindset of, I've studied with a bunch of different people. They all say, this is the way to do improv. This is the way to succeed. And then you show up in a theater somewhere random. You're playing with a bunch of people.
Random?
And what's that?
Random?
A random theater and a bunch of random people. And we're going to do an improv show. That's all you know. So based on all of these different styles, what are we doing here? So I want to get down to a few things. But first off, I want to get into Rob. You studied a bunch of places. You've read a bunch of books. You've written a book. You get to a show where you have no responsibility other than, hey, we're just improvising. Nothing we need to accomplish. What are you doing? What are you focusing on? Because the ability to bring in a million different styles is there, but you can't for a half-hour show. So what are you focusing on?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question talking about collaboration, right? Talking about how do we build ideas together. You know, there might be a feeling like if you come from a different theater that you just can't play with another theater. We just don't have the same language. And I can assure you that that is untrue. Toronto, we talk about this a lot on the podcast. Toronto is a community that has, I think, a pretty good representation of all the major kinds of thought in the world when it comes to improv, all kind of living in this kind of stained glass harmony. And you don't really know who you're going to be playing with or what school of thought you'll be improvising on stage with. And so if it was impossible for us to all play together, then Toronto would be like the Tower of Babel. It would be incoherent and there would be no shows, but quite the opposite. We actually have a lot of great shows and we have a lot of great players, and somehow you all try and figure it out together. So I'd say it is possible and sometimes really enjoyable to play in a style that you're not familiar with. But your question is, what do I focus on if I'm in a theater that plays in a different style than me?
Yeah, you're in a theater, or there is no style in this theater. This is a black box theater that someone has rented and said, we are putting on improv show. We're not affiliated with any theater, and the people you are playing with, you don't know them, you don't know where they've studied. So it's just, you now have to make an individual decision. You're about to step on stage. How am I going to improvise? How am I going to initiate? How am I going to play?
Well, I think for me, the good news is I find for myself that audiences are pretty similar all around the world. Like, references change, but the kind of moves that I make at home probably are going to work elsewhere as well too. And part of the joy of improv is using that feedback to kind of craft a show for people. So one of the reasons I love improv is because you get that instant response. I was talking to someone today about how difficult it is to pitch. If you're going to pitch a TV show or pitch a podcast, I'm doing a lot of it these days, and I find it very stressful. And they were asking me, like, well, you're on stage all of the time dealing with people all of the time. Like, isn't it the same skill? And I was thinking through it, and I was like, oh, well, the difference is in a pitch meeting, I'm handcuffed to the piece of paper I wrote. And on an improv stage, I can just stop doing what I'm doing and do the thing that you want me to do instead. It's not like in the middle of a pitch meeting, I can be like, oh, this podcast will I solve a murder? It's about doggies now because you have a golden retriever. Well, improv, you instantly do that. In fact, you do that whether you want to or not. Every time you make a move, you say a line of dialogue, you either get a response or don't get a response from the audience, which helps shape your performance and kind of shapes what you do or what you're doing on stage.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I talk about this every once in a while just because I find it so fascinating. Um, UCB is the last place I studied, and that was like years and years after I'd studied at loads of other places, been on main stage. You and I toured, and my very first scene at UCB in class was stopped, and it was stopped because of my initiation.
Mhm.
And I was like, wait, how could this be wrong?
It was pretty
And they
bad, though.
explained it was
I
pretty
saw it.
bad.
I saw the videotape of you going, Bing bong, bing bong. I'm the mayor of Bing Bong Town. Do you have any bing bong, which is money in Bing Bong Town? Please help me, daughter, whose name is Bing Bong.
And I wrote it down and I handed it to the teacher, and I was like, please read this as I step on stage and twirl. So, I mean, a typical Toronto initiation.
Yeah.
But all I did, and honestly in my head, was, oh, I'm gonna rock a little annoyance here and just kind of like start strong, create a little deal for myself. And they didn't like that. They were like, we don't do that here. That is not good initiation etiquette. And I was like, wowzers, I have never heard that term in my life. So again, it's not right or wrong, but they are saying, oh, if you're here, this is what we are doing. And a question that I often hear is, well, how can I use this stuff? How can I do a UCB Herald if I'm playing with people who studied at a different place and learned the Herald? How is this going to apply to people who haven't taken this exact class with me? And that seems very frustrating to them. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this problem that you're describing about the initiation etiquette really only applies to UCB and theaters that are working in the UCB style, like free association. I can't think of another theater company that demands a particular type of initiation. Maybe there is some kind of Johnstonian theater that's using Who, What, Where, or Crow in a particular way that has very high demands of setting up a platform right off the top. But for the most part, I would say the places like IO, Second City, The Annoyance, Assembly, Bad Dog, these are places that are saying we have some best practices that we use to get the kinds of scenes that we want. But there's nothing you could do at the beginning of a scene that would make someone go, oh, you broke the rules. I think the reason why UCB is so particular about this is because there's a kind of procedure when it comes to initiation specifically. And maybe you can talk about this a little bit, Adam, where you deliver an opening line and then you have one of two choices to either be the center or the eccentric.
I mean, possibly with other teachers, but generally the idea is we're starting base reality. Like we're kind of tiptoeing into this scene. And from the heralds that I was doing pre-pandemic, all of these initiations were kind of extremely light and soft because we are about to bring in a premise that we created in the opener. And so for someone to barge in and make this strong initiation off the top, that may completely ruin or at least make it very difficult for player A to get their initiation out there, because their initiation now might be disrupted by astronaut playing basketball who jumped on the stage and said, hoop-de-hoo, one small step, one big shot. It's like that initiation would completely destroy whatever they wanted to do. But it's like, oh, I've studied at this theater for years. And then you go to a new theater and they're like, that improv doesn't work here. It doesn't make any sense here. It actually kind of ruins what we're trying to create. And so for students who are like, oh, I'm playing a jam. And they're like, but what the hell do I do? I don't want to do the wrong thing. I don't want to bring in this from theater A and theater B and have them be like, why would you do that? That's actually quite insulting. So it's very confusing for people who are now have this luxury of studying everywhere, where normally, or not normally, but I guess years and years ago, like if you and I, Rob, were coming up in Toronto, everybody kind of knows what's up. unless you're a transplant from another city, you're like, oh well, this is how the shows are played. This is how the teachers teach. This is how the theaters that we have available to us train. But now, people in Toronto can be studying anywhere and bring that to the Toronto stage, and people be like, I don't know what to do. And the people bringing it might get frustrated of like, why aren't you responding the way I thought you're going to respond? And it's creating a very odd situation.
Mm. Well, there's a couple things I want to say to that. Yeah, okay, that's a great refresher for me. So what you're describing with these UCB initiations is they're pretty much creating second beats from the openers.
Yeah, or like an Armando initiation.
Right. So yeah, there's an opener, there's a monologue. I think of something funny, and then I think of a clash of context, and then I'm pulling you, although you aren't the driver of the first beat, we didn't establish this game together. I'm kind of thinking of a premise for you, and then you're going to kind of either support that premise, kind of like a mirroring premise, or maybe you're going to have an emotional reaction and be very angry to that premise. You either love or hate the premise that you're offered. So, okay, I understand why UCB might be so careful about that. I could imagine if I was teaching a Herald class at the assembly and someone came in as Spaceman, I would also probably stop the scene and be like, hey, this is a second beat. You got to set up the game for us. But this other question that you've asked, which is about, well, what do I do if I'm learning this? I'm learning this technique in Germany, and I come to play my jam at the SOCAP in Toronto. Nobody is doing these techniques I learned from this German theater. Well, I think we have to manage our expectations a little bit here. So I would say, first things first, you can't expect the people that you're playing with to know what you're doing. That should be the first rule. There are times in which you and I might be on tour, or maybe I'm arriving to a theater. I have to assume that they don't have my experience. They don't have my viewpoints on improv. And so I have to change the way I play based on that. There also might be moves that I want to do in my own city that I can't do because nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about. You and I were both part of this company called the Impatient Theater Company here in Toronto. They were doing a kind of Chicago-style long form, and that small group of people were really trying to push boundaries for what long form could be. We definitely had montage here. We definitely were doing kind of like Laurent's or tag out parade type shows, character slaps, slacker type formats. But when it came to like openers and group games, this was all kind of new to Toronto. And I experienced this firsthand playing with people who weren't in the same company as me, trying to do these particular kinds of moves and feeling so frustrated. I remember doing a second beat initiation, and my scene partner did not understand my offer, and they bulldozed right over it. And they took us to a scene that was nonsense. It was absolute nonsense. And I remember getting off stage and just being furious, like shaking mad, because I only got to do 2 scenes and one of them was a wash, and I embarrassed myself up there trying to do this hip new move. Well, that's an insane thing to try and do. To expect that someone's going to crawl into my brain and know this weird technique that no one else knows. Why would I ever assume that they would know how to play in the way I was taught?
So then this leads to the next question, which is, so what would be the advice that you would say to someone and say, look, you have no idea who these people are? And they're like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the goal of the show is. It's just an open show, right? We're just doing a montage, and that's all I know. And it's like, well, what would you say to them in terms of how they would be playing? Or what are some kind of fail safes? Or what are the things that, no matter what, the universal language, so that they are not trying to... Because again, unless you've studied everywhere, you may not know what is universal. Like, this is just unique to UCB, or this is just at Second City. You only know that through experience. And so as someone is growing through their experience, they might be like, well, why isn't everybody learning this? Or why am I the only one learning this? is this a waste of time, or is everybody else a waste of time? Like it's a lot for someone to say, this is the way you attack this art form. And when someone's getting inundated with opinions, it kind of feels like they might be handcuffed when they're about to step on stage because they want to do it all. And that doesn't really work. So what do you say to those people?
Well, I think it's interesting when you're talking about the universal language, and that's an interesting question for us to discuss. There's this theory in string theory that if you go back further enough in time to the beginning of the universe, that all of the separate forces like magnetism, the nuclear force, gravity, as you go further in time, they kind of congeal into one singular force. So there's this one kind of force in the universe, and as the universe cooled or things slowed down or however you want to describe it, that these forces kind of broke apart into these different fingers of the exact same thing. I kind of feel that way about improv thought, where like if you took Annoyance, if you took IO, if you took Second City, you took all these theaters, they're just one finger of the exact same root of improv. And we don't actually have access to what the core of improv is, but we have all these different point of views that just shed a little bit of light on what real improv is. And it's interesting seeing people who have trained at different places do the exact same moves, but just call it something else completely.
Yeah.
And we see this a lot. Like in biology, that's called convergence, where it's like rodents learn to fly and birds learn to fly, but they did it in a completely different way than insects. So everyone's learning how to fly, but they may not have the same body parts or the same anatomy to make that happen.
Yeah, that's really funny. It's like, I can't even remember what city it was, and maybe it's a few cities, but people who sweep edit by like also putting a hand up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They'll put a hand as if they're creating like kind of the top of a rooster and run across the stage. And I remember seeing that being like, hold on. I'm just fascinated. Tell me about the hand. And they're like, I don't know. This is just what we do. I was like, so there's no purpose to the hand. They're like, no, it's just you sweep and you run across. You're like, oh, okay. I learned it too, but just minus the hand. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Yeah, it's this conversation about like sweeps and swipes, like who
tags and taps.
Yeah, who's out there being like, I'm swiping a scene? Like, who was the one who started that phrase and spread that all throughout America? I have no idea. But swipes and sweeps, tags and taps. Yeah, so we might encounter someone from Loose Moose who is not doing game of the scene. They have a kind of like a set of gospel type rules of things that you're trying to do and things that you're trying to avoid. And if you can avoid all the bad stuff and hit all the good stuff, then you're going to have a good scene. That's very different than how you and I learned how to improvise or how you and I teach now. But isn't it mind-blowing to play with someone from Loose Moose and you see their character say the same catchphrase 3 times in a row, and you go, game of the scene, and they go, character. I learned it from a short form game that we played. Wild. And we can trust that most improv is kind of doing that. It's interacting with these other forms, and the terminology is going to be different. The scenes might look a little different. Our values might be different. But the things that we're interacting with are going to be the same because we have the same audience. And the audience responds to similar things, whether you're from Annoyance, from Second City, from IO. The shows might look different, but the audiences will always be the same.
Okay, so now the specifics.
Hate it.
Yeah, so we're talking a bit about all of these different theaters and kind of their specific take on improv. What is the best way to do a scene according to us? So, Rob, you've got a wealth of knowledge. If you were to take some of these stylistic moves or approaches from different theaters, let's go through and talk about what are the things that you think each one does really well, or something that you would definitely add to your congealed mess of a force.
Great.
Thanks.
If I were to think about what the theaters do great, I'm going to miss some, so please forgive me. But starting with annoyance, I definitely would take initiations from annoyance. I think that's the basis of great characters and hot scenes. From Second City, I would take a look at scene work. I think they have a really good, the way that we talk about kind of a story structure, platform tilt, turning point, I think is helpful. Even if you're not using it, it helps you in a jam to get out of scenes if you have to. If I was talking about game of the scene and second beats, definitely would be the assembly. Toronto and Mexico, I think, have a really good handle on it. Who am I missing? IO, I would take monoscenes, and I would take group work from IO. I think they've done those two things really, really well. And then UCB, I would take like style, and I would take energy from UCB, especially like the energy of the shows. I think they've tapped into something really beautiful there. So that's generally what I might borrow from some of the theaters that I really, really like.
And I think this is part of the joy of being an improviser, is being, someone who performs a lot, who's got a lot of experience, but there's still ways of tackling this that you haven't tried yet. There's still ways to get into it that might be more exciting, more risky. As I said, like going through UCB was like an odd mix of learning how to do their style, as well as a teacher being like, oh, this is a great exercise, and seeing new ways of teaching. But then also this kind of relearning of like, oh, yes, I know what a second beat is, but I don't think about them the way you want me to think about them. Or I would never initiate the way you're asking me to. So I know how to fly like a bird, but you want me to fly like an insect. And so it was very cool to continually balance those feelings. So I really enjoyed it. But do you think there's a potential for people to overtrain, right? You hear about some that, especially if you're at like a festival, you'll hear students like, well, I'm in this class right now at this thing. I'm at this class with this person, and I'm also doing this private coaching with this person. Is there a risk of overtraining?
No, I don't think there's a risk of overtraining. I think there's a risk of grinding something out for a pointless result. But I don't think another perspective is going to be a problem. I think if we were to look at the improv community as a whole, I would say multiple perspectives on improv is super important. We were talking about UCB earlier, and I'm sure you've experienced this. I've experienced this a lot in Toronto and recently too, where you'll have someone who arrives to Toronto, they're from UCB or they're from IO, and within their home theater, they do really well. And they're probably experts in their field. And I watched a guy, very good improviser, go up and play Catch 23. And I've never seen someone eat shit worse. It was one of the worst shows I've ever seen. And they looked like they had stumbled off a level B class.
So just to give everyone a little concept of what Catch 23 is, there's 3 teams, a host and a judge, and each of these teams has 23 minutes broken up over 4 rounds. 23 minutes to perform. You can kind of do whatever style of improv you want. Usually there's a music director or at least someone in the tech booth to give you support if you want to play a short form game, if you want to do a musical, an epic parody. Like, you can do whatever you want. And then the audience judges, and the guest judge gives you a score as well. And at the end of the night, the winner moves on to the next week. So it's very segmented scenes. One suggestion, one scene. And just because it's 23 minutes doesn't mean it's broken up evenly. You could have a scene that is 1 minute. You could have a scene that is 9 minutes. It's kind of up to the tech person, really. I guess you could call it your own, but it's quite random. So anyway, going from IO or UCB to this style would be a complete 180.
Well, and it feels a little bit like you're entering the Thunderdome when you play Catch 23. If I don't think Catch is running right now after COVID, but if it was and I was playing it tomorrow, I would be nervous going to do that show. Because if you trip at the beginning of the show, you're done for the rest of the night. 2 hours of the audience just not being on your side, and you spend the rest of the show trying to get back there. It is a very competitive, judgmental in a friendly way show, but because of the constant marking, because of the open format of it, because it's not like theater sports that is a competition, but I would argue that you're on a team, you're protected. It feels like a house league competition, where this feels like the big leagues. If you play Catch 23, like if you get a 5 from the judges and 5 from the audience, you did something really right. If you get a 1 from the judges and the 1 from the audience, you've done something really wrong. And I've seen it happen. It happens. So having this very established person from IO show up to Toronto, which there might be a little bit of bias there too. It's like, oh, Toronto, I don't know much about it. It's not Chicago. It's not New York. It's this Canadian city. How much do they really know about improv anyways? I've done this, and this. In my home theater, I'm a star. Here we go. Let's play Catch 23. Uh-oh, something went wrong. Wait, the rules of improv aren't working here. Wait, what are you guys doing? I don't know what this is. How do I keep up? That was a really eye-opening experience for me. And I've had folks just even come from UCB and come play a Herald here, and watching them play, struggling a lot because they know that there's another way of playing this, but they have no experience with it. They don't know how it works. They don't know what moves to make. The moves that have kind of been prescribed to them don't necessarily work here because they require both people to do what you're told. And in Toronto, good luck trying to tell someone what to do on stage unless you're doing a Herald and this is a second beat. It's a little bit more chaotic maybe at IO or than UCB. So yeah, I think there's a kind of egolessness that is required to be good at this, because you may be a master Herald player, but you're not a master player. You're not a master at Heralds here. You're not a master at Heralds at this theater. You got to earn it. You got to earn it in front of the audience.
So we've got a million options now. We can study wherever we want all the time. Rob, someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, Rob, I'm about to begin my improv journey, or I've just fallen in love with improv, and I've got a bunch of disposable income, and I've got some time, and I want to study with the best." Where do you tell them to go?
I would ask, what do you want to do? What kind of show do you want to do? What kind of scenes do you want to do? I think I told the story a million times before, but I'll tell it again.
Can't wait.
This is Adam's life with me. Our entire friendship is, can I tell you a story? And him going, okay, how long is this one?
Yeah, I can see that.
Do you know that for 200 years, Japan cut off all their borders and they were like, no one's allowed into Japan? You know this.
Yes.
So an American steamship shows up at the harbor and they go, Americans are here. They have a steamship. We don't know what steamships are. We have no way to stop them. Oh, wait, they have guns? Oh, we're in a lot of trouble. Like, things moved on quite quickly without us. And so the Japanese went, cool, let's figure out who's the best at everything. And so they sent little ambassadors to all these different countries. They sent one ambassador to England to learn how their education system worked. They sent an ambassador to Germany, I think, for their land army, somewhere else for the navy, somewhere else for, artillery. And they all came back to Japan and they started to rebuild their country. And somehow, within a very short period of time, they were able to catch up to their rivals and, in fact, maybe even supersede them at what they were doing. So that perspective is a great perspective to have if you're thinking about building your improv catalog. If you want to learn how to do characters, well, great. Go to the people who do characters. Go find those folk, whether they're in Edmonton, which has produced a lot of great character actors, or Groundlings, or, a 24-hour improvised soap opera that's just the characters are jumping off the page. Wherever it is, go find the type of improv that you love and then go learn from those people. But this, you asked earlier, like, is it possible to overtrain? And I think my issue is, are you just grinding it out? Are you just taking more classes for the sake of taking classes? Or is there a plan here? Back in the day when we used to have these auditions for conservatory, when people didn't get in, there was always this conversation about what do we do with them? Because we don't want to like boot them to the curb and say, well, you didn't get in, you're not good enough, bye, see you later. So we always tried to recommend a class for them so they felt like you have something to do next term. We're not abandoning you. We still care about you and we think this class is a good fit. But one of the issues is sometimes you get these people who have auditioned 5 times and they've taken all the classes. And we go, well, maybe we put them in this class. And my argument was always, if they've done our beginner level program and 5 electives, what do we think one more class is going to do for them?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if they didn't get it the first 5 times and they didn't get it the second 5 times, then obviously there's something with the way that we are teaching this that is not working for them. They're not creating the best scenes they possibly can. They need to go somewhere else that gives them a brand new perspective on this and then come back to us. Maybe a different perspective than the perspective that works for us. So whether that's a clown class, whether that's taking a class at one of our rival companies, they should go do that because hopefully that cracks the code for them in some way. So that is ultimately my big argument. My argument is always study with the folks that fill out your repertoire. I've been thinking a lot about clown recently. There's a lot of these fucking clowns are in Toronto. Have you noticed that? A ton of clowns.
Yeah, in LA as well.
All these fucking clowns are taking over. We're gonna be worried about these clowns, dude. And they're also taking improv classes now, these fucking clowns. And they're posing as regular improvisers and regular comedians. But then afterwards you find out, halfway through, that they're a fucking clown. Well, with all these clowns here, I'm like, oh, you know what? I haven't moved my body in 3 years. Oh, I watched Isaac and Ken do a show. Oh, I'd never do that. I never do that kind of comedy. I don't want to roll on the ground. I probably should roll on the ground. I should probably take a clown class.
I love it. I think of I was thinking the same thing actually.
These clowns, these fucking clowns. We gotta stop them.
No, that I was like, ooh, I don't really do comedy that way. What an interesting thing to try and do, and it feels a little like, remember Goldeneye?
Mm-hmm.
Do you actually?
I played it once or twice, but just a reminder, we were a Sega Genesis family, so.
But like, you didn't have any pals who had Goldeneye for multiplayer?
Right, but if you have a pal who has Goldeneye, do you want to play with them? Because I don't. I don't want to get killed within the first 30 seconds, and they look at you being like, do you know how to use the controls?
But you improvise with me.
Right.
I run circles around you, and you're like...
That's because you don't know how to work the controls.
Anyway, long story short, I had a very different childhood than you. We played GoldenEye all the time with all of our pals. Anyway, in multiplayer mode, there's all these different levels, terrain that you can play on. But you have a whole bunch of different weapons. And just the idea of having the weapons doesn't mean you use all of those weapons. You choose. And you make an informed decision on, oh, I see the situation I'm in. I know what gun I'm going to use. Obviously, I'm going to use the sniper rifle because this calls for it. And I think that's where we get to with our training of training is great. Getting all perspectives is great. And then I think where people might get tripped up is I've got to do all of it all the time. I've got to use all my weapons at once. And you just can't. And so with all of this training, just being aware that you can only do so much in a scene. And it's supposed to be fun, right? You don't need to prove to the audience or to the other performers, I'm doing this style of move. Improvise in a way that you enjoy. Mm-hmm. And if there's a technique from a certain theater that you love, use it when you want. And if you're in a situation where initiating this way in this theater with this audience, the way this show's going, doesn't really make a lot of sense in my brain. But I feel the pull, since I studied at Groundlings, I should really initiate in a Groundlings way. No. You can have all this training and use it when you feel. And so just being aware that there's no rush to combine it. There's no need to show off that you can do all of it at once. Improv is supposed to be fun and exciting and collaborative. So having this all is fantastic. And then just getting the experience of when do I use what tool will hopefully make you a calmer and more excited improviser to be like, oh, I wonder what tactic I'm going to use tonight. I wonder when I'm faced with that audience, what pull I'm going to feel of, ooh, I can't wait to try this thing. And hopefully that will, remove some of the pressure that I think people are feeling of, I've got all this, I got to use it all right now.
Yeah, I think the piece that students forget is that the last step of your education is to forget everything that you've learned. That's a really important part of it. You're talking about like these different weapons you can use. I was thinking about the Matrix, and I was thinking about, imagine you go into the Matrix and you're like, okay, so I can learn like all these different fighting styles. Nah, I'm going to put jujitsu in my head 100 times. Cool, I'm going to fight with you. All right, agents, you showed up. Can you lie down on the ground? My moves only work when you lie down on the ground. It's like you're combining all these different fighting styles to put people in positions where the other styles can kind of take over and you can finish the job. And that sounds very complicated. How do I know when to use it? You know when to use it because you have the benefit of being in front of an audience who's constantly rewarding you or punishing you for making the right or wrong move. I recently taught a class that was a 201 at the assembly, and I'd been teaching them. I taught their very first class. And the assembly classes, they move really quickly. It's 8 weeks, and you're ripping through pretty complicated stuff. So at the end of this process, I go, how are your classes? I haven't seen you guys in maybe 5 or 6 weeks. And they go, well, we're really stressed out. I'm not sure I like game of the scene. Like I can do it, but I'm just not, I don't know how to do it really. If I focus on it, I can do it, but otherwise, like it's really hard for me, and I just don't think I'm doing well, and I don't think the scenes I'm doing are good. I went, well, this is your last class. You don't have to keep doing game of the scene if you don't want to. You have a tool, do whatever you want. Why don't we do some scenes and we'll see how your show goes? And so the people who hate game of the scene go, wow, okay, that's really generous. I'm not going to do any game. And they go on stage and I take notes and I go, you said that you hated game and you didn't know how to do it? Were you playing game in that scene? And she goes, nah, I wasn't, sorry. And I go, let's look at what you did. And I laid out all of the instances of game, all of the perfect patterns she set up, all of the perfect dynamics. It was already in her body. It was impossible to forget what she had learned, but she just spent too much time in her head reflecting on it and not enough time just doing and playing. And so hopefully that's what these classes do. They kind of rattle around in the back of your brain, but they're not the rule book. It's not like you're landing a plane and it's a step-by-step process. It should get all jumbled up there and then somehow become your own.
I like that. Well, thank you, Robbie. This was a fantastic conversation. Mm-hmm. But we're not done. Something I want to know is what's something on stage, off stage that you are excited about?
Our good friend Lloydie from the Improv Chronicle came to visit in Toronto. He had a 4-day trip here, and it was nice to see him in person. I've known Lloydie for a couple of years. He's always been very kind to the back line and to me personally. And so it was very trippy to be able to see him in flesh and blood. But one of the things I did for Lloydie when he was coming is I put together a little Google Doc of all of the hot things to do in Toronto. This has happened a couple times when people visit. I always try and give them 1 or 2 suggestions. And I'm always like exhausted. I'm busy. I don't know what to do. So I thought I'm going to create a Google Doc one time. And now when I know someone is traveling or visiting, I have a Google Doc for them that will be available to them anytime. So if you run a festival, if you are in a city where you frequently have guests, put together that Google Doc. Save yourself some time and some stress. Ooh, It's so great. Lloydie enjoyed it. I got feedback from Lloydie about things he liked to do, things that he thought were interesting. And then other things where he's like, or most travelers are like, oh, you took me to the old part of town. It was built in 1955. That's not old for me. I live in a castle somewhere. So those are all always great feedback to know what people are looking for from out of town.
Lovely. Well, my cool thing, it might help you because you are in the middle of Pitchtown, USA. And for anyone, I saw this going around kind of like screenwriting Twitter, and it's just an app called Transparent Note, and it's free. And what it does is it takes your text and it kind of makes it translucent. And so if you're doing a video pitch or you're doing a meeting and you want to have your notes here, not off to the side where you're looking away from the camera, it kind of goes on top of the video. And so you can read while keeping like general eye contact with a Zoom or whatever video meeting is.
Whoa, so it's basically like a teleprompter.
Yeah, but a teleprompter that is, again, translucent so that you can see the video still. So if you are, needing cues of facial expression or whatever, you can still see that person as well as all of your notes.
For me personally, the facial expression isn't helpful. It derails me because they keep going like, ugh.
Rob is waving a smell from his nose for those listening just on the pod. Awesome. Well, thank you, Rob. This podcast, as always, brought to you by the Sonar Network. If you like this podcast, subscribe and hit that bell. You can rate and review on Apple Podcasts because we want all the other improvisers to have this resource, which we love. Robbie, as always, a blast, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
And now it's clear as promise that we're making two reflections into one. Cause it's like you're my mirror staring back at me, staring back at me.